Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you listen to us. Welcome to Chasing Self-Actualization. My name is Marisol Sanchez.
And I'm Janaiah von Hassel.
Episode 3. We're experts now.
Yes.
This was a fun episode for me because we brought in a therapist, a professor. She's a therapist. She's a professor at UNCW. She's an executive coach. She's a multi-hyphenated success story. Her name is Lisa Brooks. And that was a really interesting conversation with her. And I'm excited to share it with everyone.
Yeah, I am too. I really loved, we covered a lot of different topics, but I think what really stuck with me was the discussion around self-trust, because it's something really present for me right now that I'm working on, trusting my own intuition and showing up authentically. You and I have been in the corporate world for a really long time, and even outside of that, I'm a people pleaser. I've come from a background of being a people pleaser. I think that's sort of the norm, honestly. More people kind of show up like that. Being genuine can feel really uncomfortable. And I think it's phenomenal that we're making movements towards authenticity. It's a buzzword right now. Everybody's, genuine authenticity. It's like definitely a buzzword, but there's so much to be found there. Mm-hmm. And so I loved hearing her take on that. And since recording that episode, I've actually, seen my own authenticity and my own ability to trust myself has taken a leap. So being able to offer that to our listeners, I'm excited about that.
So for me, I mentioned in our first episode that I had this, I woke up and I prayed and I meditated and I just had this, you have to quit your job. You have to quit your job and this isn't what you're supposed to be doing. And to trust that voice, to quit a 30-year career. Yeah. When I say that I feel that as we're doing this, that our guests are speaking to me.
Yeah.
That's what I felt like, because that's where I am right now, is trying to discern how I can serve. How can I be the best version of myself? How does that work in my career, in my life? And when she spoke, I remember she said one thing. She said the phrase, "Who do you think you are?"
Yeah.
And that describes my corporate experience. That's how I felt. No one ever said that to me.
Yeah.
But having an opinion, being authentic in a corporate space, that was the energy I always felt back from executives. And I always worked mostly with C-levels. Who does she think she is? Right. And I felt that.
Yeah.
I felt that. So I loved having that conversation with her, because it validated for me that, yes, I did need to leave this corporate experience because I want to be myself 24/7. Right. And I don't want to make myself smaller. I don't want to not shine. I don't want to not be able to have my thoughts and opinions. I want to be me. And I found that difficult in a corporate environment. I worked for wonderful companies, so this isn't shade to any company. It's just being a Gen Xer, climbing the corporate ladder.
Yeah.
To say I was a people pleaser doesn't even begin to describe it.
Well, and if you, we talk about this more in the interview, but childhood trauma can also play into a lot of this and make it hard for you to trust yourself or to even know who your authentic self is. If you started people pleasing when you were 2 because that's how you felt safe, then when you're 42, you don't know what you like and what you think. You know what people want to hear. And so you have the practice of a 2-year-old. And you have to practice exploring yourself. And when you're 2 and you make mistakes, it's not a big deal. When you're in your 40s, 50s, it matters more. So something I took away from this and I've been practicing is find safe places to practice discernment, self-trust, authenticity. Ask myself, where do I want to eat dinner? That's safe, right? What color paint do I want this room to be? Because if you have a lifetime of people pleasing, you don't have the developmental milestones to truly sit in your authenticity, which when we see people who do that, I think that's, the self-actualization that we see. But if you've just not, getting to know yourself and letting yourself grow into that person when you've just spent your entire life wondering what you're supposed to think, feel, say.
I feel like you just read me, but yes, that's exactly it. I grew up, a lot of my childhood trauma is around, it wasn't just people pleasing with, my immediate family. It was, I thought I was a sinner since birth. Right. That's what I downloaded. Yeah. I downloaded that every thought I had was impure. I'm a bad person. I'm a bad kid. And that trauma really has led me to navigate my life from a place of I'm not good enough. I did something wrong. I didn't need an employer or an ex-husband or anyone to say anything bad about me because I already felt it.
Right.
Like, that was in my, and that's taken me 20 some years to scrub away and work at.
And I think it's fair to say if that's what you grew up in, that's your default. And so, and it is for me, that is very much my default, same as yours. And when I'm tired, my default comes out. When I'm stressed, when anything is going to bring that default mode, and it's about self-correcting now and actually choosing to behave differently than your default. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that default goes away, but we can do things to help make that choice more automatic.
Like listening to Chasing Self-Actualization. But no, actually, I 1,000% concur with that. And this episode, when we interviewed her and afterwards, I didn't have that sense of imposter syndrome that I had in previous interviews. This one, I kind of left feeling empowered about my decision to leave my career. I felt I want to help. I want to help everyone, but I'm very attuned to wanting to help women and young girls. That's in my volunteer work. That's where it's mostly been. And having daughters, having suffered from low self-esteem most of my life, if I can help one person, one little girl, one teenager, one adult, just know that you are worthy,
right?
Period, for existing, then that's my mission. Like, I want women to stop apologizing. And it doesn't come from a place of anger, which maybe it would have come 10 years ago. It comes from a place of living it, knowing I didn't think I was worthy.
Yeah.
And now I do. Now I'm like...
Yeah, you have intrinsic value, and there's a difference between knowing that and feeling that. Yeah. And I think if you know it later in life, there's more to do before you can feel it. And that's a lot of what you and I have sort of come together to do for ourselves and our listeners. So, and I thought that Lisa was phenomenal at providing some steps, some realistic steps, if you're not already there. If you're not already waking up being like, I'm a superstar, here's some steps that can help get you there.
I'm flawless. Now, I have a playlist of music that I listen to in the morning to try to get myself into that mindset. It was great. One thing I will say about this process so far for us and the people we've interviewed is it has validated for me this theory that people who are chasing their self-actualization, who I feel are further along in the process than I am, energetically, it feels different to be in a room with them and have a conversation with them. We go deep quickly.
Yeah.
And you feel it. You feel their presence and their authenticity. And it's measurable, to me at least. And so for me, this has all been a great honor. And I'm just thankful for all of them. I mean, imagine getting an email saying, hey, we're starting a podcast, Chasing Self-Actualization. We think you'd be perfect. And what you find is, most people who I think are chasing it don't walk around thinking that about themselves. They're super humble.
Yeah.
And all of our guests have been like that.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So with no further ado, I'd love to welcome you to listen to episode number 3 with Lisa Brooks. Hello, and welcome back to Chasing Self-Actualization. I'm super excited for today's guest. It is Miss Lisa Brooks. She comes to us from, she's a professor at UNCW, she's a therapist, she's a coach. She does it all. How are you? Welcome.
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Beautiful, by the way. So shiny and bright.
Thanks. I am shiny and bright.
So I mentioned to you before we started recording that when we put this podcast together, we sat down, we made a list of people that we thought we wanted to interview locally. And I put your name down. We're Facebook friends, but we met maybe 20 years ago, because my youngest is how we met, through play group for my youngest, who's going off to college.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes. And I specifically remember, you and I talk about energy all the time. And it's something that I'm getting more comfortable talking about as I get older, which is we're energetic beings. And there's science now. They can measure the energy, right? And I felt that when I met you and your family, went through all of you, but I heard you speak also, that your energy was elevated. I just felt like you were chasing your best version of yourself 20 years ago. So that's why I was like, I have to have her on.
I think you knew that before I did.
Maybe. So I want to start with when I emailed you and you saw this title, what does chasing self-actualization mean to you as a therapist, as someone who's been in the profession for over 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, I really thought a lot about that. Obviously, I sort of know what self-actualization is. I can remember sitting in a college classroom, probably in like 1994, hearing self-actualization and thinking, wow, that sounds really cool. That sounds like, a place that I was not necessarily intentionally going, but something that I sort of, like, it very much appealed to my senses at that time. I think that, 30 years later, what self-actualization really what resonates with me about that word now is like self-trust. Like, I think that that is sort of the foundation from which I work always. I believe that the only expert in our lives is ourselves. We know better than anyone what works for us, what doesn't work for us, what we need, what we don't need. I think that we live in a culture that tells us to outsource that a lot. That really encourages outsourcing. And one of the things that appeals to me about sort of the self-actualization journey and sort of chasing that is just learning to trust ourselves.
That's huge, because I feel like I'm in that stage right now, and I'm phrasing it as discernment or the voice, like when I pray or meditate and I get this message or awareness. I'm in that stage now, learning to trust it. And that's how this came to be. Like, you want me to start a podcast?
I think what comes to mind when you say that is people who have either grown up in traumatic childhoods, and I know you have experience with that, or experienced any form of trauma throughout their lives. Their self-trust begins to compete with triggers and anxiety and things that make it really difficult. And if you grew up in trauma, you've never even had a foundation for it.
Sure. You don't know what that voice is. Yeah.
Sure. How do you speak to that for an adult now who wants to go on this journey but has so much insecurity, maybe doesn't know where to begin this connection with self or to trust themselves?
For me, part of it is that I think I sort of appeal to people who are willing to do some of that dig deep work that's about unlearning.
Yeah,
and I like that. Like, I love that idea of just what do I need to unlearn? Where have I sort of grown out of certain things? You know what I mean? I think we don't always feel like we have permission to sort of be like, I don't need that anymore. That served me during a season of life, but maybe it doesn't serve me now. And letting that be okay. And I think that what happens with that is that we begin to understand, like, oh, I'm going to lose some people in that process. Right. I'm going to lose some approval in that process. Culturally, again, I mean, I look at systems all the time, and I'm looking at sort of like how I've been raised as a woman and what that means for me in the world that I live in. And a lot of that's a lot of people pleasing, and a lot of that's about doing what you're told and being sweet and fun to be around, and, quieting my voice, not taking up too much space. Who does she think she is? Oh. And I think so much about like, wow, what would it have been like if that 5-year-old girl inside of me who didn't know any limits had gotten to sort of traverse this territory? But, you know, so much of my life was about sort of how other people saw me, how other, you know, what did other people think? And it was so very little about what I thought. So I think in the work I do now, what I'm trying to say to people is, like, whose voices are you hearing?
That's so powerful. I remember doing a speech where I talked about the fact that I remember being in grade school doing a book report on the One China policy and how I just remember the little girl thinking, oh, girls don't, we're not worth anything. And deconstructing that can take a lifetime.
Absolutely. And then you add sort of like what you're talking about. You add some type of trauma, you add some type of grief or loss into that, and you just got, you know what I mean? And there's just so much that gets built around us to protect ourselves from that fear of not being valuable, that fear of not being worthy, that fear of not mattering. You know, and so we just layer up, and then sometimes around like 40, you're just like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
This isn't fun.
For me, I grew up in a deeply Christian family, and like the girls wore head coverings to church. And I remember a lot of the younger girls felt very committed to that. And I was like, this is messed up. Like, and I was 8. And I was like, I don't want to do this, you know? So I had a strong sense of autonomy. And I'm not sure where it really came from it because I was homeschooled. So I just had a really small circle. And this is, you know, women were to submit to men. Sure. And I didn't like it. But I thought that was the devil in me, to be honest. Sure. And that was what I would like kind of stuff it down. And years later, when I was managing a drinking problem and getting to the point of going to outpatient recovery for it, I was realizing that was me masking that I didn't want to be subservient to anyone, that I wanted to just honor myself. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's powerful.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think about that a lot, like when I don't know, hand over heart, whose voice matters?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, whose life is this?
Yeah. Because as women, I mean, especially when you enter motherhood, especially as well, it stops being about you, and then everything is about your children too. And I'm on a mission to help girls, young girls, stop apologizing. Because I know I apologize for my existence probably since I could speak. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And I know that that's a cultural, social download that I got. And deconstructing it is very powerful. It is very doing that unconscious bias. I realized I had inner misogyny, strong, deep inner misogyny that I had to deconstruct. And it is powerful, and it does help you evolve and change. I'm not the same woman I was 20 years ago, certainly not the same girl I was in my 20s. And learning to love myself has been my journey to love myself. And
I think it's most women. I mean, you know, I think that feels really like, you know, you say that and you hear it, and like when I hear you say it, I'm like, oh, yes. And then I hear that resonated from so many women. Yeah. I mean, it is just almost like, and it looks different for everyone. It's hard to believe sometimes when you look at some people that they may struggle with that, but it's actually the very most common thing I hear.
Yeah, I feel like in the last 2 years, I've begun to admit, I suffered. I'm saying past tense because I'm trying to manifest that into existence, but I suffered from low self-esteem, and I realize now how my low self-esteem was navigating all the choices in my life. Sure. And that it's not about what you look like. It's not about the money in the bank account. It's has to do with way in the past and deconstructing that. My second question for you is, and I ascribe this to you. Okay. It's a long memory, 20 years ago, but I remember hearing you say something along the lines of choosing to live versus existing. And that stuck with me for years because I realized I feel most people are existing, just going through the motions of life. And to live life is seemingly scary, but when you start to do it, feels beautiful and magical from a healed place. Healing is part of this self-actualization, isn't it? It's not an easy, cheery.
No, and it's not a linear process. You think about, I mean, like people, you know, you hear that a lot, you know, oh, I'm trying to heal through the, yes,
I'm on a journey. Yeah.
But it's a journey. I mean, like it is a journey that I think with it's sort of like it just keeps opening up new layers all the time. I think new things get revealed to us as we're sort of able to.
Yeah, and I think divine timing too
Absolutely.
has
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I think that we struggle to be present in a culture that really wants us numb.
or distracted.
Absolutely. I mean, numb or distracted or, you know, competing or comparing or perfecting or, you know what I mean? Like 5-step planning. I mean, you know, everybody wants sort of like this, what's the quick and easy 5 steps that I need to do to get there? Yeah. And I think if you're really present and alive and awake and paying attention, you recognize like there's nothing about this is easy. It's not supposed to be.
Yeah.
The goal isn't really happiness. The goal is to be able to feel everything. Like it's like it's not just about like, am I just supposed to feel happy? People say that to me all the time. I just want to feel happy. And I'm like, I want you to feel happy, sad, mad, excited, frustrated, annoyed.
Yeah,
I mean, I want you to feel it all.
So
All the
much
emotions.
emptiness in chasing one emotion or chasing one thing. It's interesting you say that because I remember like when it kind of clicked for me that we don't, you know, I started to feel like when something that unpreferred came into my life, I would start to think like, all right, what are we going to find out? Like what new thing is going to be discovered in this? And then you just start taking life as it comes to you with a little bit more curiosity as opposed to like trying to control something we never had control over.
Well, and I'm really aware of that. That's a season I'm in right now. It's just like, oh, I'm controlling nothing. Like nothing. Like that is, and like there is something terrifying and liberating about that.
Yeah, that's
like,
where my faith walked in.
Yeah.
Was in that space of fear and awesomeness, giving it up, just knowing I'd be okay. Like that last layer of Maslow of security.
And there was something that came to me through recent loss was how we hold on to things like white knuckle holding on. And my sister said it to me. She said, you know, I'm so afraid to let go because I know I'll realize I wasn't holding on at all.
Yes.
And so we're just, I know, we are holding on to these mythical ideas of some sense of control. And surrender, which I've been trying to understand it more deeply through the experience of it. It's not only the recognition of, you know, the lack of control, but, you know, because I would think, like, how do you, like, what does this even mean? It's resting into the bigger picture that we've never had, you know, control. And I think for me, because if you grow up in a lot of, many of us, whether it's through the school system or how things were at home, we think that everything unpreferred is a punishment.
Sure.
And so there's a lot of release. And I think that's the surrender. Like, I'm not really being favored or punished, you know?
This just is. And sometimes, like, something that just came to me when you said, like, is sort of what's meant for me will find me. I think that we've been sort of sold this bag of goods, like, work hard, work harder than that. Be more, do more. You know what I mean? Like this just sort of like chase, go. Yeah. And I've certainly bought into that.
Yeah.
Hook, line, and sinker. And it's brought me nowhere.
Yeah.
Like the best things that have come to me were just sort of being like, you know what? If it's for me, it will find me.
Yeah.
And trusting that.
And that closed door and open windows. Right
and that
behind
every closed door, I mean, and that's a hard thing. You know, I teach students at UNCW, and I think, you know, sometimes they will feel so sad because of something that happened or so frustrated about something that happened with a job interview or an internship or something like that. And I'm like, it's not for you. It's not for you. The learning experience is for you.
Yeah.
But
What would you say when somebody feels intuitively that something's for them and it doesn't happen? And I think this is where sometimes we lose trust in ourselves. Man, I really thought that was for me, and it wasn't. How do you speak to that?
I love that question. I think that part of what, like, this is just sort of like from the top of my head. It's not a fully considered thought. But I think part of what I would think is maybe it's not for you yet. I do believe you said divine timing. I believe in that. I just think that there were things, I remember so many things that I wanted at 20, at 25, at 30, at 35, at 40, at 45, 51. I'm like, I wasn't ready for them then.
Or it wasn't the right boss, or wasn't the right.
How many
wasn't
things
right.
you had an inkling about? I'm 43 now, and many things have just come into my life that I've known about since I was 12, or I've thought about and dreamed about or seen for myself. And I'm like, life is long, and sometimes we do get that little dangle carrot, but it can be really far off sometimes. So I love that you said what's meant for you will find you. I'm really in that space for myself lately of recognizing what's meant for me is mine and getting out of that rat race.
Yeah, that's how you found me.
Yeah, I know.
It really was. I think about this a lot, like how often we try to sort of put a square peg in a round hole. It's just like, I'm trying to make it fit and work. And what I've noticed, and this is very new learning for me in the last 4 or 5 years, I will not do that anymore.
Yeah.
I just won't. I won't try to push or force
anything.
My middle son is on the spectrum, and he's non-speaking. And I, prior to that, would call myself a mover and a shaker, and I could fix everything. And it was such a lesson to me in that life isn't even meant to be fixed. It's meant to be experienced. And he taught me that, because at first I could just see, like, how do I help? And then he didn't really need my help. It was that I needed to see it differently. And I've realized how much of life, this feeling of I have to fix it, it's internal. I feel broken, so I'm trying to fix everything around me. And the more whole I become, the less messy it all looks,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When I say all the time, like, you are not broken. You do not need to be fixed. And if that is true for you, then it is true for me too. And so it's just all that sort of like that reciprocity of like, if I believe that people are not broken and they don't need to be fixed, then that is true about me too.
I love
beautiful.
that. I love that.
I also love how this evolution of time, because the things that mattered to me 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years, it's constantly evolving. I don't even carry a purse anymore, whereas 20 years ago, I was all about the designer purse. Yeah. I recently said to my husband, the life I have right now is all, I'm perfectly happy with it. Like, there's nothing more that I want. Whereas I felt for most of my life, I thought money, the position, the husband, the 2.5 children, three, and the two. I thought the white brick. There were these things that I thought were going to give me validation, give me love, self-worth, and I'm like, 50 years old, no, none of those things. It's none of those things.
It'll never fill that hole, right? I mean, and I think that's an interesting piece for me a little bit about midlife, is that we do sometimes come around to that. I think that that's not always true for everyone. Yeah. I really wish it were. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of my goal sometimes, and what I'm sort of talking about. What is it like to be content? Yeah.
And it's peaceful. That it's life hits me every day. The hard comes in. Yes. It's not perfect. The life experience has never been promised to be perfect. So it's not perfect. We're dying since our first breath. I keep saying that. Like, we're dying since our first breath. It's a hard experience. But contentment, or just a baseline of like, I'm okay. I'm not going to be homeless. I'm not going to die, and no one's going to kill. Like, all this scarcity and fear that,
And that your anxiety of those things isn't warding them off, I think, is the thing for me.
Absolutely. Like that the sitting and worrying about it and fretting about it and trying to sort of, manage it for ourselves or for someone else. I mean, I'm a mom. I've got 2 grown sons. They are the joy of my life. And my full desire is to get out of the way and let them have their life. Yeah. Like, they don't need to. I have actually no plans for them. Yeah. I have no vision for them. I just can't wait to watch it unfold. And that's very different. That's like something that for me is like a generational thing that I'm really trying to shift in my family of origin is what is it like to just let you, like to just let you wander and to let you figure it out and find your way and to like be the best cheerleader I can be.
I have really enjoyed motherhood from the state of my own curiosity. Yeah. What would it have been like if I wasn't wrong all the time? And watching them and seeing like the vibration of that. It's a real beautiful thing. And I love how you said that because I've actually almost made myself wrong for it. I've been more just curious than envisioning things for them. I'm like, what's next, guys?
Yeah.
So I love that you say it like you do because people say kids come in as a blank slate and I'm like, no, they don't. They come in with it written out. They know what they're doing.
Well, I'm so intrigued because I think that, again, we think we're controlling it with the right university, the right degree, the right this, the right that, the right GPA, the right athletic endeavors, if we can just keep them on this path and we can just make it easier and clear everything out of the way and make sure that they succeed. And I'm like, I think that failing forward is kind of the gig, right? Yeah. Like, and I just... being in sort of the world that I'm in vocationally, I just sort of sit back and go, it's just so cute to see all these people thinking they're controlling something that's not being controlled.
Yeah. I'm curious in your work, people who have aligned to their purpose more so, or people who have been able to take that step. And I think you had mentioned in your past you worked with children. And so in seeing people in traumatic situations who are the ones that want to get out and want to move forward, what do you feel are the traits that make people the most successful in that?
I think it's I've never been asked that question, but the first thing that comes up to me, for me, is people who are just willing to pull the curtain back and sort of really look at it as it is. You know what I mean? That are, whether they're children or whether they're grown-ups. People who are willing to just say, this happened. I was there. I know what happened. And not buy into sort of the avoidance of it. Just sort of, I think the avoidance part for me is sort of like the first part. I think we spend so much time and energy avoiding difficult things in our past that we can't actually reconcile and be honest about them. And I'm not saying forgive. I'm saying
Yeah. I think when we think of avoidance, it seems like, oh no, that didn't happen. But I know for me, what it was for a really long time was being really optimistic about things.
Absolutely.
That there really wasn't a silver lining for, but I had made it that way.
Yep.
And when I deconstructed that, my first reaction was, this isn't better. But therein lies the work, right?
Sure, therein lies the work.
Yeah, so I love hearing you say that because I think being able to, and a lot of content creators I follow talk about this, sort of like look into the abyss, look at the devil, see the ugly.
Look at the pain.
Or
go to the pain.
Feel it.
The wild part about hurt is that's where the healing is.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if we keep avoiding it, and listen, sometimes you need to in order to get through it, right? I mean, sometimes you just have to and again, the season approaches where it's time to
move on,
to lean in.
Yeah.
But I think, there is this piece that the pain is the portal.
Yeah.
And
I agree 1,000%.
There.
In my life, I've noticed that I wish that we lived in a world where it was easy to evolve and that it was joyful. In my experiences, it has been the knees on the ground, praying, not understanding, not knowing, and feeling disconnected, so utterly disconnected, that has brought me the biggest growth. And it's, one of the last questions I have for you is, one of the things I say is, it's your healing journey, you're chasing your self-actualization, being the best version of you, is so unique to everyone. It's like a fingerprint, because every moment that you've experienced to the present day is what you have to work with. That's what created the present day. And so one of the things I'd like to ask you is, I think sometimes we start the process, but then it gets a little hard. And sometimes what I know I did this for a while, for a few years, you stay in your story. You know, you stay in that victim, like, oh, you don't understand what happened to me in my childhood. You don't understand, you know, and I was there for years. I love my friends. Thank you for sticking with me for so long, but I don't know how you did it. But I had that story for like a good 10 years. How I want people to engage and try to chase their best version of themselves, because I think the world needs it. I think if instead of focusing on what it's going to take to make someone else happy, if we all focused on ourselves, the world would be better. Just even incrementally. If I can get 10 people out there to chase their best version of themselves, live to their fullest potential, imagine all the people they can affect. So my question for you is, I know you can't, be a therapist to everyone, but what's the motivation? What's the motivation for us to be the best versions of ourselves, to heal? Because you can't really promise, there's nothing in that college course that said that 1%, what does that 1% look like? I don't know. But I feel like it's definitely worth it for me, because I know I've learned to love myself. I know I've learned to walk in this place of learning to be faithful and growing and evolving. But I don't know what it is for everyone,
Yeah. I think you're on to something. It's different for everybody. Everybody's motivation is different. I think for me, it was important to me. Unlearning was a really big piece. I had really grown up very rewarded for perfectionism and for performance. I had sought so much external validation. I grew up in dance and theater and all of that kind of stuff. And it's just, you're doing it all for the applause, and there's so much criticism and so much rejection and all of that. And, family of origin stories and, things like that added to that. And I think for me, I wanted to do things different.
I think that's why I pegged you 20 years ago. That's what I think I pegged from you, is that you weren't going to do it. You were like the rest of us, in my perception. But I felt like you were chasing the best version of you 20 years ago.
I think when I hear you say that, what I will own chasing is honesty. Like, I just wanted to tell the truth to me.
That's
and then
beautiful.
If other people were offended by it, that was okay. But I wanted to, I know me better than anybody, and I'll tell anybody sort of the good, the bad, the ugly. I get that about myself. I know that about myself. I think that can be very lonely as a parent. I think that can be very lonely as a friend. I don't think everybody wants to do that. And I don't know that that's necessarily everyone's self-actualization path, but it was certainly mine. So for me, it's just I struggle in systems that have a lot of avoidance, whether they're family systems, friend systems, work systems.
You want to get
deep.
What
I mean? I do. I don't do sort
That's
of
what
the
I
chit
sense
chat.
from you.
I can sit here and talk to you about this all the time. If you start asking me, say, where did y'all have dinner last night? I'm going to be weird. I'm automatically going to be weird. I don't know how to do that.
I'm similarly bored with it. So if it doesn't go here, I'm checked out, and I'm thinking about what I got to do tomorrow. Yeah. And I found I'm really trying to be more present, but then I've been asking that question. Well, if I'm not interested, what am I doing here? And I think it's just a curiosity. I do have a real thirst and love and curiosity of life, and in every experience. So I wrote something once about the treasures in the trenches, and it was kind of what we touched on before. But in all of our experiences, there's something for us there. Yeah. We're supposed to be getting. Yes. And when we're kind of flopping through life, never collecting what we went across, it's that's what we went through it for,
I know. I always used to, I remember 5 or 6 years ago, like really just resonating with like the deep end of the ocean. Like I just want to be where the octopus are and like where the you know what I mean? Like where it's like dark and like that. I just know that better than I know the shore.
I'm the same way.
And so I love shore people. I mean, I love people who want it, but I'm not necessarily I'm not that. That's not who I am.
People can't ask me, how are you doing? My friends, just yesterday, my friends, said, how are you? I hadn't seen her for a while. And I'm like, do you really want the answer? Like, I don't have that, blunt sometimes. And whatever's going on is going on.
Yeah.
I've kind of learned that over the years. Yeah.
So I think for me, it's just that, like, I just want to tell the truth. I want to tell the truth in the relationships that I'm in. I want to tell the truth
in life.
Yeah. And like when something smells, I want to say it smells. What's going on? Like
your advice for someone who's been very avoidant and wants to start showing up more authentic in their connections.
Genuinely, I think it's go to the person that you trust the most and start there. I think that sometimes we have this transforming idea of like, I want to be more authentic and I want to, and we just suddenly like start blasting everybody with authenticity, and the feedback is swift and quick. Like, stop doing that. That's too much. So I think what I say to people a lot is, why don't you start with the person you trust the most? The person, like the person that you're in relationship with, that you can say, I'm trying on some new things, and I'm just going to try to be more authentic and tell the truth more, and just sort of like starting there.
Yeah.
Because if you've got a lifetime of people pleasing,
somebody's always been more authentic. My husband is so authentic, and it's what attracted me to him was like, this guy's going to tell it like it is. I'm never going to wonder. And so he'll tell me sometimes, just say, I'm like, well, you can, like, that would be shocking coming from me, because people pleasing was really something I was super good at and practiced hardcore. So for me coming out of that, it did start with him. He was doing it. He was always someone it was easier for me to be authentic with, but I was like, I'm going to commit to this in this relationship, and then trickled out. And so similar to what you say, for me, and I was not only had done it my whole life, but I'll say some of us are really good at it. It's almost like, why am I so gifted if I'm not supposed to?
I'm a great people pleaser.
It's so reinforced.
And it's almost not fair to our friends, I have to say, because our friendship's built on your lie. So it can be alarming for them, and we can expect them to be like, whoa, and so I think expecting that everybody's going to be receptive of that is unfair.
I find it gets lonelier.
And they're not.
Yeah.
Right.
I find it gets lonelier as you heal, because you, at least from my experiences, you learn boundaries. That's a big one, people. Boundaries. You learn boundaries, and then it's that trust that, bringing us back to that thing of trusting. I would just say something. Let's say I show up at a deli, and I would normally edit all that out. Okay. Back to trust. Trusting yourself and your voice and your thoughts, and that you're doing the right thing, and that you're growing and evolving at the rate that you need to be, is beautiful, and that's what I want for people.
Yeah, and it's messy, right? It's not perfect. I tell people, I'm not perfect. I'm not sorry. Like,
Every day,
human. Some days you're going to get a version of me that you really like. Some days you're probably going to get something that you eat. Like, I can't. I used to think I was controlling all of that.
Yeah.
Right. And now I'm just like, wow, Lisa, you get to have a day, you get to have a week, you get to have a month. Sometimes you get to have a year. It's just like, there's just times that like, it's a season.
Yeah. Now I remember the point I was going to make. As you heal, I felt for myself, I have a wonderful core group of friends that I've had for a long time, but the acquaintances or corporate, people that you would normally network with or try to, that kind of goes away. Like I spend much less time in groups of people. Like in my 30s, I would want to be invited to every party and go to every event. I'm happy. I am happy at home, in my world. It seems I don't know. I don't know if that's a natural thing or it's a me thing, but I just feel like I have less tolerance for where the world is right now. And I'd rather be in my bubble.
The world's difficult now. The world's really, I mean, and I'm not saying that it hasn't always been difficult, but it is, it's a hard, I find it to be a hard time to be human.
I do.
Yeah.
I do agree.
I really do.
You're saying you UNCW students, and I have 2 kids in college. My third's about to go to college. And what I thought was important as a parent 5 years ago was this moment now, right? College, where they were going, what. And now one's graduating next year. And it's like, no, who are you as a person? What are you chasing? Are you certain? Like, I'm totally different than I was 5 years ago. And
I'm fascinated by that. I actually had this moment, in my world, we talk about the frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe is sort of like when, the brain is fully formed and you have all the sort of cause-effect thinking, and you can really like do all of this critical analysis of things and things like that. Most of our college students are graduating at 21. They're going into corporate America without a frontal lobe. And I tease about that. Like, I really do, but I'm like,
I
we
tease
are
my kids
so
now. Yeah.
pushing. And I'm like, wow, do you realize like that? And even for us, sometimes we have graduate students that are 22, 20, I'm like, wow, this is a lot. My trajectory being much slower. I was, 28 when I was done with my education. And so I just go, and had a lot of lived experience and made a lot of mistakes, a lot. So I just sometimes feel for them. I'm like, it's the rush.
Our generation, I'll include you, you're a little young, but we have experienced life without smartphones and this technology, and now we have the technology, and it's a different world. And now we're seeing our children who have had this technology at different points, and how it's coming to fruition. It's interesting. It's a very interesting time in history where I don't want to be fatalistic. Like, I keep hoping out the aliens show up and say, here's a cure for cancer. You guys are idiots. You're fighting over stupid things. Be kind and be one. I joke, but kind of hoping.
I think, too, for our children, a lot of the structures are changing, dissipating. There's a lot more transparency. There's a lot more awareness in the collective, so to speak. And so things are really shifting, and our kids, for good and for bad, because I work in scaling tech startups. So I see these millionaire 22-year-olds that came up with a much-needed product, and it's phenomenal. And the whole team of 18-year-olds are making $250,000 a year and dropped out of school. Yeah. And there's just, the structures are really changing, and it's kind of saying, like, it's limitless, but within that, it's overwhelming.
Yes. Yeah.
With the young. And, my son, my oldest, is only 14, and he's talking about, all of these people that he follows and all of these inventions and all of these things. I remember when I was a kid thinking, I want to be a pioneer, but everything's been discovered. That was like kind of the thought, because before all of this blew up, it was pretty settled. This is how it was. And now it's almost like the new world. And I think in that there's a lot of good and bad,
Absolutely.
like everything. Yeah.
Like everything, it's a new world. It is a whole new
New
terrain they'll be sitting in these seats one day having very different conversations.
I hope you all chase your self-actualization. Well, thank you so much for coming.
So
I knew it was going to be great. I wasn't worried about it at all. Yeah. I imagined you must have been like, why? But I knew I had that vibe. I had the things that you said, 2 decades ago stuck with me, resonated. And I'm sure if you did it for me, and those moments, you've done it for dozens of, if not hundreds of people over the years. So thank you. Thank you for your energy.
Pleasure. Yes.
And that is another episode of Chasing Self-Actualization. Thank you for joining us. Please make sure to like and subscribe and follow us for more information.
And to learn more about our guest or what we're doing next, you can check out our website at chasingselfactualization.com.